I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are holding this piece of advanced carbon fiber technology right in your hand,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
and it weighs like less than 100 grams.
Hmm.
It is perfectly balanced, it's highly engineered, and its entire purpose is to propel a projectile through the air at speeds that literally rival Formula One race cars.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. I mean, we were talking over 400 kilometers per hour. And when I describe it like that, it sounds like, I don't know, aerospace engineering.
Yeah, it sounds like a weapon or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you are listening to this deep dive, you already know we aren't talking about weaponry or jet propulsion. We are talking about badminton.
Good old backyard badminton.
But the thing is, even if you play regularly, like even if you are a seasoned club player hitting the courts 3 nights a week, there is a very good chance you are completely misinterpreting the physical forces happening in your own hand.
Oh, absolutely. It's basically the ultimate biomechanical disguise.
The ultimate disguise. I like that.
Yeah, because it's fascinating the contrast between what we feel we are doing on a court and the extreme physics of what is actually happening during a high-level rally. It's just staggering.
Right, because it just looks so fluid.
Exactly. We look at professional badminton and we see speed, sure. But beneath that speed is this game of absolute violent kinetic energy, and it's all wrapped in a sequence of movements that require timing down to the millisecond.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. We are taking this massive stack of intense biomechanical data, high-speed camera analyses, and advanced coaching frameworks, and we're using all of it to decode the exact mechanics of the perfect badminton strike.
The holy grail of racket sports.
You know it. Specifically, we are putting the smash under a microscope today. We are going to track the kinetic chain of this movement, starting from the, microscopic friction of your shoe on the floor, traveling up through the anatomical levers of your body, and ending at the exact split-second placement of your pinky finger.
Which sounds insane, but when you take the time to really examine the physics and the biomechanics involved, the perfect smash stops being this elusive, mysterious, athletic feat.
It becomes something you can actually map out.
Right. It becomes a highly solvable physical equation. It is all about the conservation and transfer of momentum, pure and simple.
So if you are an active player trying to break through a plateau, or you're wondering why your shoulder aches after league night, or you're just constantly frustrated because your aggressive shots keep clipping the white tape of the net, well, this deep dive is completely tailored for you.
There are a lot of aha moments coming up.
Seriously. I spent the last few days poring over these biomechanical breakdowns. And the hidden complexity, the sheer amount of micro-timing required for what looks like a single fluid swing, it completely rewired how I think about human movement.
It really is a masterclass in extreme physics. And, to start making sense of this massive physical equation, we actually have to begin at the ultimate point of contact.
Right, the racket itself.
Exactly. Before we talk about the body, we need to talk about the tool. We need to look at the racket face, and more specifically, the geometry of the sweet spot.
Let's get right into that, because this was the first major paradigm shift for me in the sources.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask almost any player where they are trying to strike the shuttlecock, they will tell you they are aiming for the dead center of the strings, like the bullseye.
Which makes sense, logically.
Right. It feels totally intuitive that the geometric center of the frame would be the optimal place to hit. But the physics data shows that is just fundamentally incorrect.
Yeah, it is a very persistent misconception. Geometrically and physically, the dead center is just not the optimal location for maximum power transfer.
So where is it, actually?
Well, the actual sweet spot of a modern badminton racket is located higher up. It's in the upper middle section of the racket face.
Just a bit above the center?
Right. If you were to literally count the horizontal strings, starting from the very top of the frame, you are looking at the area roughly between the 5th and the 10th horizontal strings. And it's situated right in that central vertical channel.
The 5th to the 10th string.
Right.
I mean, that is incredibly precise.
It has to be precise. Hitting in this exact geographical zone on the string bed provides this really unique convergence of 3 crucial physical properties.
Okay, lay that on me.
First, it offers maximum effective elasticity from the string bed. Second, it provides the optimal sensory feel for directional control. And third, structurally speaking, it minimizes the harsh, low-frequency vibration that travels down the carbon shaft and absorbs into the bones of your hand and forearm.
Wow, okay. But the breakdown doesn't stop there, which is what I found so compelling. Because the sweet spot isn't just one uniform monolithic blob that does everything everything perfectly, right?
No, not at all.
It is actually divided into distinct subzones depending on the specific physics of the shot you were trying to execute.
Right. You kind of have to think of the racket face as a multi-tool. Different zones serve entirely different mechanical purposes. So let's look at the upper zone first, which is situated near the very top curve of the racket head.
And this is the heavy hitter zone.
Exactly. This is the zone dedicated to heavy smashes and deep high clears.
And reading through the mechanical analysis, the reason for using the upper zone for power is entirely based on the physics of leverage, isn't it?
That's it exactly. You have to visualize the racket not as a separate object you're holding, but as a literal physical extension of your arm. It is a lever arm extending from the pivot point of your wrist and forearm.
Like a catapult.
Right. And in classical mechanics, the further away a point is from the axis of rotation, the faster it travels through space. So the very top of the racket has the longest possible lever arm.
Meaning it's moving the fastest.
Yes. For any given rotational speed at your wrist, the top of the racket is slicing through the air with the absolute maximum linear velocity. So if your goal is explosive power and terminal velocity on a smash, you're basically obligated to strike the shuttlecock in that upper zone. That's how you capitalize on that maximum rotational speed.
Okay, so if the upper zone is for pure, unadulterated speed, let's move down a bit to the center zone. Because if I'm not smashing, what is the dead center actually good for? The data points toward, drives, flat defensive exchanges, and quick reactionary drops.
Yeah, so the center zone is governed by a completely different physical priority, and that is uniform elasticity. When a shuttlecock hits the dead center, the strings stretch and rebound with perfect symmetry.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it gives you this ideal equilibrium between speed and precision. Think about a fast-paced, flat drive exchange where you are just trading shots mid-court.
Just rapid fire back and forth.
Exactly. You aren't winding up to generate massive rotational velocity there. You are relying on the racket's kinetic restitution, the trampoline effect, basically. You need it to do the work for you quickly and accurately. And the center zone provides that perfectly uniform rebound.
And then we drop all the way down to the lower zone. This is the area down near the frame, closest to the T-joint where the head actually meets the shaft. And the tactical breakdowns say this is strictly reserved for delicate net play and tumbling spins.
And again, we go right back to the physics of levers. When your point of contact is down low, closer to your hand, your lever arm is significantly shorter.
And a shorter lever means less speed.
Drastically reduces your raw speed, yes, but it exponentially increases your fine motor control. It allows for microscopic, highly sensitive wrist and finger adjustments.
Which you need at the net.
Exactly. When you are positioned at the net trying to execute a spinning tight net shot that tumbles right over the tape and drops straight down, you do not want speed. You want the contact point as close to your sensory receptors, which are your fingers, as possible. So your proprioceptive feedback is just completely dialed in.
I totally followed the logic on the subzones, but looking at the reality of equipment wear and tear, I have to ask a question.
Sure, go for it.
Let's say a club player is listening to this, and they go out and play intensely for a month, and they notice their strings are fraying and getting heavily worn right in that upper middle section we talked about. The immediate panicky instinct is, I'm doing something terribly wrong, my technique is flawed, and I'm chewing a hole in my strings in a weird spot.
Yeah, people stress over that all the time.
Does that wear pattern mean they have a mechanical flaw?
It is actually the exact opposite, and this is a wonderful paradox that trips up a lot of ambitious amateurs. If your strings are developing a fuzzy frayed patch precisely in that upper middle area, you should absolutely not be worried. Yeah. As the coaching analyses frame it, that wear pattern is quite literally a badge of honor.
Because it proves they are actually finding the true sweet spot.
Precisely. Let's look at what actually causes that fraying. It is friction. High-speed, intense thermal and physical friction between the dense cork of the shuttlecock base and the synthetic fibers of the strings during those few milliseconds of impact.
Makes sense.
So if the strings are steadily fraying in that specific upper middle zone, it is empirical proof that the player is consistently, repeatedly striking the shuttlecock in the optimal zone for maximum leverage.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they are generating effective friction exactly where it matters most. It indicates a really high level of spatial awareness and stroke consistency.
There is a critical distinction made in the notes, though, regarding string breakage. Because there is a massive difference between that natural, gradual fraying that eventually gives way and a string that just cleanly, suddenly snaps out of nowhere.
Oh, for sure. It is a vital diagnostic difference. A gradual fraying is the mark of a consistent, powerful player. However, If you are playing and a string just suddenly snaps cleanly in the middle of the bed with zero prior fraying or warning, well, that almost always points to a biomechanical error in the swing path.
Like what kind of error?
It typically indicates a slicing motion.
Meaning they aren't hitting the shuttle flat on?
Correct. Instead of the racket face meeting the cork perfectly flush, the racket is coming across the cork at an angle. This applies immense, highly localized shear force to a single string, essentially cutting it.
Ouch. Okay, that makes sense.
Alternatively, a clean snap can also mean the player has strung their racket at a tension that completely exceeds their current muscular ability to deform the string bed, which just causes structural failure in the string itself.
Wow. And what about players who find their strings constantly fraying or breaking out on the outer edges near the physical frame of the racket?
That is the definitive sign of a timing or spatial error. If the wear and tear is localized on the perimeter, the player is consistently missing the sweet spot entirely. Their contact point is compromised, and they are losing massive amounts of power and control on every single strike.
Which naturally leads us into how the equipment itself tries to mitigate those exact human errors. Because the data we are looking at extrapolates this physics into two massive equipment variables. We have the physical shape of the racket head and the tension of the strings.
Right. Two very important factors.
I want to start with the shave.
Yeah.
Because if you look at rackets from 30 or 40 years ago, they look entirely different from what players use today.
They really do. Historically, rackets featured an oval head shape. It was this very traditional, elongated teardrop design.
Yeah, you still see them in cheap backyard sets sometimes.
Exactly. But the physics of an oval head dictate that the sweet spot is quite small and highly concentrated right in the dead center. If a player possessed the world-class precision to hit that tiny spot perfectly every single time, the power transfer was phenomenal.
But I'm guessing most people don't have that precision.
Right. It demanded absolute robotic consistency.
It was incredibly unforgiving.
Highly unforgiving.
Yeah.
I mean, if you missed the center of an oval racket by a centimeter, the racket would twist violently in your hand and the shot would just die. That is exactly why modern engineering shifted almost universally to the isometric head shape.
The squarish tops you see on every court today.
Yes. By squaring off the top curves of the frame, engineers equalize the lengths of the vertical and horizontal strings across a much wider surface area.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, and according to the structural data, adopting an isometric head shape increases the total functional area of the sweet spot by a staggering 32% compared to a traditional oval frame.
Expanding the optimal hitting zone by a third is a massive technological advantage. It essentially democratizes the power of the racket, allowing players who don't have Olympic-level precision to still generate incredibly effective shots.
Exactly.
Right.
It drastically widens the margin of error, making the game faster and more aggressive for everyone.
The other variable is string tension, which is measured in pounds. And honestly, tension feels like a weird status symbol in local badminton clubs.
Oh, it totally is.
All right, you always hear players bragging about how they string their rackets at 28 or 30 pounds as if higher tension automatically equals a better player. But when you dig into the physics of string dwell time, it's vastly more complicated than that.
Way more complicated.
Let's look at low tension first, which the data categorizes as anything under 24 pounds.
So the physics of string tension revolve around a concept called the coefficient of restitution, but honestly, the easiest way to visualize it is to think about a mattress.
A mattress, okay.
Yeah. A low-tension string bed, say 22 pounds, acts very much like a soft, plush mattress. When the shuttlecock strikes the strings at high speed, the string bed has a lot of give. It deforms deeply, creating a large, deep pocket.
And a deep pocket is what creates the trampoline effect.
Exactly. Because the string bed deforms so much, the shuttlecock spends more time physically in contact with the strings, and this is called dwell time.
Dwell time, got it.
Right. So during this longer dwell time, the strings are doing the work. They absorb the energy, they stretch, and then they physically propel the shuttlecock back out as they return to their original shape.
Like a slingshot.
Yeah, exactly. This makes low tension incredibly forgiving. Even if you miss the absolute center, the deep pocket of the strings will help correct the shot and provide free power.
But when a player strings their racket at a high tension, say 28 or 30 pounds, they're completely changing that physical interaction.
They are entirely removing the trampoline effect. High tension shrinks the sweet spot drastically. The string bed becomes incredibly rigid. It no longer acts like a soft mattress. It acts more like a sheet of high-density plywood.
I want to focus on the why here. Why does a tight string bed act like a sniper rifle, as the analyses describe it, rather than a trampoline?
It all comes back to dwell time. When the strings are pulled that tight, they simply do not deform when the shuttlecock hits them because they don't stretch. The dwell time, the milliseconds the cork spends touching the strings, drops to near zero.
So the shuttlecock doesn't sink in at all.
Barely at all. And because there is no deep pocket absorbing the energy, the kinetic transfer is instantaneous and highly aggressive.
Wow.
The shuttlecock leaves the rigid racket face incredibly fast. If you strike the sweet spot perfectly, this provides pinpoint, razor-sharp accuracy because the strings aren't bending and warping the directional angle.
But there's a catch,
A
right?
huge one. Because the strings are doing absolutely no work to propel the bird, the player is now required to generate 100% of the raw power through their own bodily mechanics.
And if they miss that tiny sweet spot on a 30-pound racket,
It is a disaster. Because there is no elasticity to absorb the shock, all of that violent kinetic energy travels straight down the shaft and into the player's arm. It feels like hitting a rock with a baseball bat.
ouch. Okay, so let's establish a baseline for our listener. You got your modern isometric racket, you found a tension that matches your physical strength, and you are consistently hitting the shuttlecock in that upper middle sweet spot.
Perfect setup.
You are doing everything right with your equipment. But when you go for a heavy smash, the shuttlecock keeps slamming on a downward angle directly into the white tape of the net, just burying it in the net over and over. If the equipment is right, why is the shot failing?
This is where we transition from the physics of the racket itself to the spatial geometry of the court and the limitations of human anatomy. If you are consistently burying your smashes into the net, the biomechanical data points to a very counterintuitive truth.
Which is?
For a smash specifically, if you try to hit the dead center in the racket, you are making a fundamental geometric error.
Let's break down the trigonometry of the net fault. Everyone knows the net is 1.524 meters high at the center. It's a standard. But the margin for error when you are hitting from the baseline, trying to drive a shot downward over that 1.5-meter barrier, is incredibly unforgiving.
It is a game measured in millimeters, and geometry dictates everything. Think about the triangle you are creating.
Okay, picturing a triangle.
The highest point of the triangle is your racket face. The base of the triangle is the floor, and the hypotenuse is the flight path of the shuttlecock, which has to clear the net.
Right. And when a player strikes the shuttlecock with the dead center of the racket face instead of the very top edge of the upper zone, they are physically lowering the apex of that triangle. The measurements show you lose about 10 to 15 centimeters of vertical reach just by missing the top of the frame.
10 centimeters might sound utterly insignificant when you are standing on a massive court,
Huh.
but you have to extrapolate that angle. When you are positioned in the back court, trying to drive a projectile downward on a steep trajectory, a 10-centimeter drop in your starting elevation drastically alters the math of your downward angle.
That changes everything.
It really does. That tiny drop in your contact height is mathematically the exact distance that causes the shuttlecock's trajectory to intersect with the top tape of the net instead of clearing it.
If the starting point is lower, the angle has to be shallower to get over the wall. You can't force a steep angle from a low ceiling.
Exactly. And the geometry failure compounds with a biomechanical failure, because we established earlier that the center of the racket has a shorter lever arm than the top, meaning it generates less rotational speed.
Yes, less raw velocity.
So imagine the sequence in real time. The player swings, they hit the center of the strings instead of the top. Their contact point is instantly 10 centimeters too low. Simultaneously, because they hit the center, the racket speed is slower than they anticipated.
So they feel the shot is failing.
Right. The sensory feedback hits their brain in a fraction of a millisecond. The shot is weak and low.
And the body instinctively panics and tries to fix it.
Exactly. To compensate for a shot that feels weak and low, the player will instinctively overflex their wrist in a sharp downward motion. They try to forcefully manufacture a steep, aggressive angle using just the localized muscles of their wrist.
Which is a terrible idea.
It really is. And by doing that, they literally drive the shuttlecock straight into the net. They artificially create an angle that mathematically cannot clear the 1.524-meter barrier from that lowered starting height.
It is a cascading failure that all begins just because they let the shuttlecock drop 10 centimeters too low on the strings.
Yeah, it all starts there.
So physically, how do we restructure our body positioning to ensure we hit that high top zone? Because human instinct is to let the shuttlecock fall right above our head or even worse, right in front of our face, so we can track it perfectly with both eyes and just hammer it.
The biomechanical data is incredibly explicit on this point. That binocular instinct is completely detrimental to power.
Wow. Completely
What
detrimental.
Completely. The shuttlecock must never be allowed to drop directly overhead, and it should absolutely never be allowed to drop directly in front of your chest's center line.
This brings us to what the coaching frameworks call the right diagonal adjustment.
Let's look at the anatomical restrictions of hitting a shuttlecock directly in front of your body's center line. If you try to swing a racket at a target hovering right in front of your nose, observe what your arm is forced to do.
Well, just mimicking it now, to get my hand in front of my face, I have to draw my upper arm across my chest. My elbow has to bend sharply to fit in that space, and my right shoulder naturally hunches down and inward to allow the movement.
And right there, you are physically compressing your own skeletal frame. By hunching your shoulder and collapsing your elbow to reach that centerline target, you are dropping your point of contact by another 10 to 20 centimeters.
We are losing even more height.
We're compounding the geometric error. Furthermore, when your arm is cramped across your torso, it is almost anatomically impossible to keep the racket face open and flat to the target.
Oh, that makes sense.
But the most devastating loss is rotational. Having your arm collapsed in front of your chest completely neutralizes your forearm's ability to pronate.
Pronation being that inward twisting of the forearm, like turning a doorknob.
Yes, or violently turning a key in a lock. Pronation is the absolute primary source of terminal velocity in a badminton swing. But if your arm is trapped against your chest, the radius and on the bones in your forearm have no physical clearance to rotate over each other.
You're stuck.
You are stifling your own biomechanical engine.
It's like trying to throw a 90-mile-per-hour fastball while keeping your elbow pinned directly in front of your sternum.
Yeah.
You can't generate any whip. Your rotator cuff is completely neutralized.
A perfect comparison. You are negating your body's natural anatomical levers.
So if the center line is a trap, where is the optimal contact point in three-dimensional space?
For a right-handed player, the absolute optimal contact point resides in what the analysts describe as the 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock position.
Just to visualize this, imagine a large clock face hovering vertically in the air right in front of you. 12 o'clock would be directly above the crown of your head.
Right. And you do not want to hit at 12 o'clock. The contact point must be shifted to the 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock position. It must be out in front of you and distinctly out to the right side of your right shoulder.
Now, I have to push back on this slightly because if the shuttlecock is out at 1 or 2 o'clock off to my right side, I am losing direct, straight-on binocular vision of the bird. I can't look at it straight down my nose. Doesn't that make it harder to hit?
It is a biomechanical trade-off, and it is a trade-off you must make. You sacrifice a tiny percentage of direct visual tracking in exchange for complete anatomical freedom.
That sounds worth it.
It is. When the shuttlecock is positioned out in that 1 o'clock space, your arm can reach full, uninhibited extension without the shoulder hunching upward. The elbow remains extended. And crucially, because your arm is out to the side, your forearm has 100% unrestricted physical space to execute a violent, full rotation pronation.
So you get all the power back.
Yes. You maintain your maximum vertical height, you maximize your lever length, and you unleash your body's full rotational capacity.
Okay, so we have fixed the geometry. We are reaching out to 1 o'clock, we are striking the upper zone of the racket, and we are easily clearing the net. But reaching the shuttlecock is really only half the battle. Now we have to talk about power generation.
The fun part.
Right. How does a 150-pound human generate enough kinetic energy to blast a shuttlecock at over 400 kilometers per hour? How does that energy travel from the floor up through the musculoskeletal system and into that 1 o'clock contact point?
This brings us to the core of the kinetic chain. And the absolute secret to generating devastating, explosive power in a smash lies in a physical mechanism the data refers to as the braking effect, or the sequential transfer of momentum.
The braking effect. I had to reread this section of the notes multiple times because it completely defies common sense.
It really does.
If you poll any group of amateur players, almost all of them will tell you that the secret to a powerful smash is synchronization. You want to strike the shuttlecock at the exact precise millisecond your dominant right foot stomps onto the floor. Stomp and hit simultaneously. It feels like you are channeling your whole body weight into the strike.
It feels incredibly powerful to the human brain to coordinate those two massive impacts, the foot hitting the floor and the racket hitting the bird. But the high-speed frame-by-frame analysis dismantles this entirely. The feeling of simultaneous impact is a neurological illusion.
A complete illusion.
It is not simultaneous. If it is simultaneous, you are losing massive amounts of power. The true kinetic chain is a highly sequential chain of events separated by microscopic delays, specifically a delay of about 0.05 seconds.
This is tiny.
But crucial, the right foot absolutely does not hit the ground at the same time the racket strikes the bird. The right foot must strike the floor just a fraction of a second before the racket makes contact.
A 0.05-second delay. Why is that microscopic stagger so critical to power?
It is basic Newtonian physics, specifically the conservation of momentum. The coaching frameworks use a brilliant visceral analogy to explain this, which is the car crash.
Oh, this one is great. Walk us through the car crash.
Imagine a vehicle traveling at high speed down a highway. Inside this vehicle is a passenger who, unfortunately, is not wearing a seatbelt. If that car suddenly slams on the brakes and comes to a violent, instantaneous stop, what happens to the unrestrained passenger?
The vehicle stops dead, but the passenger's momentum continues at the original speed. They fly violently forward through the windshield.
Precisely. The massive forward momentum of the heavy vehicle is aggressively transferred to the lighter, unsecured object inside it. This exact transfer of momentum is what must happen in your body during a smash.
So who is who in this scenario?
Your lower body, your legs and hips, is the speeding car. Your upper torso, your arm, and your racket make up the passenger.
That is a staggering way to visualize it.
When you move aggressively into position for a smash, your entire body mass is generating forward kinetic energy. If you swing your arm while your feet are still sliding or moving, that kinetic energy bleeds out, it disperses. But if you violently plant that right foot into the hardwood floor, you are slamming on the brakes.
Stopping the car.
Exactly. Your lower body decelerates to zero almost instantly. The massive momentum you've generated has nowhere to go but up. It transfers violently upward into your torso, ripples through your shoulder, whips down your arm, and explodes into the racket.
The lower body stops dead, and the arm flies through the windshield. But wait, I have to ask about the physiological toll here.
Okay, what's your concern?
If I'm a full-grown adult moving quickly backward or sideways, and I violently stomp my right foot to slam on the brakes, doesn't that send a massive destructive shockwave straight up my tibia and shatter my knee joint? How do players not destroy their legs doing this?
That is exactly why technique is paramount. You do not break with a locked, rigid leg. When the foot plants, the knee must be slightly bent, and the quadriceps and glutes engage in what is called an eccentric contraction.
An eccentric contraction.
Yes. The muscles actively lengthen under tension to absorb and redirect the massive ground reaction force. They act as a heavy-duty shock absorber, preventing bone-on-bone impact, while simultaneously routing that kinetic energy up into the pelvis.
Okay, so the muscles absorb the shock and channel the force upwards. But if you hit the shuttlecock at the exact same moment your foot lands, you bypass all of this.
Exactly. If the impact is simultaneous, the braking effect hasn't had time to occur. The momentum hasn't had that 0.05 seconds to travel from the floor up your spine and into your arm.
You're just using arm strength then.
Right. If you hit at the exact moment you land, you are essentially just swinging with the isolated muscles of your shoulder and arm, completely divorced from the momentum of your lower body.
The sequence has to be foot plants, body decelerates, momentum surges upward, and then, a fraction of a second later, the arm whips forward, riding that wave.
That is the flawless execution of the kinetic chain. And the data applies this braking effect to the two main variations of the smash we see in competition. We have the moving smash and the stationary jump smash.
Let's analyze the moving smash first, because that's what most of us use when we are scrambling on the court.
The moving smash heavily relies on harnessing horizontal momentum. This occurs when a player is actively moving backward or shuffling sideways to get behind the trajectory of the shuttlecock. They utilize the final step of that footwork to aggressively plant their dominant foot and brake.
Since they're already moving, it builds up energy.
Exactly. Because the player is already in motion, it is a very fast, fluid sequence. It hides the player's offensive intention beautifully, and it perfectly weaponizes the horizontal speed they built up just by moving across the court.
But the notes highlight a major geometric trap with the moving smash.
Yes. Because you are traveling horizontally and then initiating a sudden, violent stop, there is a strong gravitational pull downward. Your center of gravity wants to drop rapidly.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, if your hips and knees sink too low when you apply the brake, you artificially lower your entire body, which lowers your point of contact. And as we discussed with the trigonometry of the net fault,
You bury the shot in there.
exactly, the geometry collapses. Executing a powerful moving smash requires immense core and leg strength to apply the brake forcefully without letting your vertical height collapse.
Which brings us to the undisputed king of badminton highlights, the stationary jump smash. The player is waiting under the shuttlecock, they launch vertically into the air, hang there for a second, and just obliterate the bird.
If the moving smash is about converting horizontal momentum, the stationary jump smash is a masterclass in exploiting vertical ground reaction force. It functions as a literal coil and spring mechanism.
A coil and spring.
Yeah. The player physically crouches, pushing massive kinetic force downward into the floor. Newton's third law dictates the floor pushes back with equal force. As the player explodes upward, they begin rotating their hips and twisting their chest. Then, at the absolute apex of their vertical leap, they violently contract their core muscles, engaging an aerial brake.
Slamming the brakes while floating in midair. That is wild.
It is. By sharply contracting the abdominals and locking the rotation of the torso in midair, the rotational energy is violently transferred outward into the arm. Because this technique maximizes vertical ground force and utilizes an aerial strike point, it generates the highest possible contact point, the steepest possible downward angle, and the absolute maximum raw kinetic power a human body can produce.
So within this massive kinetic sequence, pushing off the floor, locking the core, whipping the arm, what is the central hub? If I'm a player trying to audit my own kinetic chain, what is the one physical link that absolutely cannot fail?
The biomechanical data is completely definitive on this. The absolute most critical, non-negotiable step in the entire sequence is the aggressive rotation of the hips.
The hips. Not the quad strength, not the shoulder mobility.
The hips act as the singular bridge. They're the only anatomical mechanism capable of converting the linear vertical push of the legs into the rotational horizontal whip of the arm.
Wow, just the hips.
Yeah. You could possess the strongest legs on earth. You could possess a 40-inch vertical leap. But if you do not aggressively and deliberately rotate your right hip forward toward the net before your arm begins to swing, all of that lower body energy simply dies in your abdomen. The hips must initiate and lead the rotational sequence.
Which provides the perfect transition into our next major diagnostic section, because this answers the frustration every single player has experienced.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
You set yourself up for a smash. You tell yourself, I am going to put this shuttlecock through the floorboards. You grit your teeth, flex every muscle in your upper body, swing with absolute maximal effort, and the shot comes off the strings weak, floaty, and completely embarrassing.
It is the great paradox of athletic effort. The harder you try to muscle the shot, the weaker it becomes. It is universally infuriating.
Why does that happen? If I am exerting maximum muscular effort, where's the energy evaporating to?
The kinetic energy generated by your lower body is getting trapped. It is dying in your own musculature before it ever reaches the racket frame.
Dying in the muscles.
Yeah. The biomechanical analyses diagnose this beautifully by identifying 3 primary energy leaks. These are the physical and anatomical roadblocks we inadvertently create when we try to force power with our muscles rather than channel momentum with our skeletal structure.
Let's diagnose leak number 1. The notes refer to this as the stiff arm. And looking at the physics, I have an analogy that makes perfect sense.
Let's hear it.
Imagine you are a firefighter holding a high-pressure hose. You open the hydrant to full capacity. There is a massive, violent surge of water rushing down the length of the hose. But right at the very end, right behind the metal nozzle, you squeeze the hose tightly shut with your hands. What happens to the water pressure?
The flow stops instantly. The immense pressure builds up furiously behind your hands, but nothing exits the nozzle. The energy is entirely trapped by your own grip.
Exactly. And that is precisely what tensing your shoulder and arm muscles during the preparation of a swing does to your kinetic chain.
It is the biological equivalent of a kinked hose. Physiologically, muscles operate in pairs, agonists and antagonists. When your bicep flexes, your triceps must relax to allow your elbow to bend.
Makes sense.
So, if you tense your entire arm in a misguided attempt to be strong, you are triggering co-contraction. You are flexing both muscles simultaneously, which physically locks your joints in place. The massive wave of kinetic energy you just generated from the floor and your hip rotation crashes into this rigid wall of tense shoulder and arm muscles, and it dissipates instantly. The power never survives the journey to the racket.
So the instinct to be strong is literally making you weak. You are fighting your own body.
Biomechanically, yes. Muscular tension is the absolute enemy of rotational speed.
That brings us to leak number 2. Lack of separation. The coaching frameworks refer to this as having no rubber band.
This directly connects back to our discussion on hip rotation. We established that the hip must act as the bridge and lead the movement. But if your right hip and your right arm swing forward at the exact same time, moving together as one solid fused block, you generate zero elasticity.
You are just rotating like a heavy wooden door on a hinge.
Exactly. There is no elastic tension being built in the muscular system. The physiological secret to massive power is spatial separation.
Meaning one moves before the other.
Right. The racket arm must lag behind the rotation of the hip by a fraction of a second. When your hips aggressively snap forward to face the net, but your arm and racket are intentionally left lingering behind your body, you are physically stretching the fascia and muscles of your abdomen, chest, and anterior shoulder across your rib cage.
You are utilizing the stretch-shortening cycle. You are pulling them taut like a massive anatomical rubber band.
Precisely. You are storing immense elastic potential energy in those tissues. When that physical stretch reaches its maximum anatomical limit, the muscles violently, involuntarily snap back to their resting length. This whips the arm forward with a velocity that you could never achieve through voluntary conscious muscle contraction alone.
It's basically free energy.
Exactly. If your arm and hips rotate together, you never stretch the rubber band. You leave all of that explosive, free snapback energy on the table.
Which brings us to the final major energy loss, leak number 3. Missing the brake point. We already covered the car crash analogy. If the driver doesn't slam on the brakes, the unrestrained passenger doesn't fly through the windshield.
Exactly. If your spatial contact point is misjudged, or if your footwork is sloppy and your shoes slide on the floor instead of planting firmly, there is no sudden, violent deceleration. Without that sharp stop in the lower body, the momentum doesn't transfer upward. Your body just kind of slowly spins out into the air, bleeding energy in every direction.
So we know the leaks. We know we are kinking the hose with tension and failing to stretch the rubber band. What is the practical physical fix? How do we retrain our bodies to stop muscling the shot?
The biomechanical data offers a remarkably simple, one-word physical cue to solve this, and that word is hang.
Hang the racket.
Yes. During your preparation phase and the initial upward rotation of your body, your racket arm must be entirely, profoundly relaxed. It should feel as though the racket is merely hanging loosely from your fingers, dangling behind you in the air.
Just dead weight.
Right. You must cultivate a sensation of extreme, almost lazy relaxation in the arm. The arm is nothing more than a loose rope attached to the powerful engine of your hips. You keep it relaxed, hanging until the absolute last possible microsecond before impact. Only in that final fraction of a second do the muscles engage.
If you are listening to this and you constantly suffer from a sore rotator cuff or a painful elbow after playing, this stiff arm energy leak is almost certainly the culprit. You are grinding your joints together with tension instead of letting them flow.
It is the leading cause of overuse injuries in racket sports, without a doubt.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the final, most intricate piece of the kinetic puzzle. We have fixed the net fault geometry, we have successfully transferred energy from the floor, bridged it through the hips, and kept the arm relaxed like a loose rope to avoid kinked hoses.
We're almost there.
Right, the wave of energy has finally reached the hand. And this is where the biomechanical analysis completely blew my mind, because the most shocking revelation in all of this research concerns the micromechanics of the human hand.
It is deeply counterintuitive, largely because of the way we use language to describe sports. If you ask anyone, even many advanced players, where the final snap of a badminton shot comes from, they will immediately point to their wrist. The cliché is, it's all in the wrist.
We hear it constantly.
Right.
But the high-speed data definitively says no. The explosive terminal velocity of a smash does not originate from the wrist joint flexing. It comes from the micro-movements of the pinky and the ring finger.
They're the secret V8 engine hidden at the very bottom of your grip.
The pinky and the ring finger. Mechanically, how is that even possible? Those are the weakest fingers on the hand.
To understand this, we have to look at the racket as a Class 1 lever system, but this time, the fulcrum, the pivot point of the lever, is located entirely inside the palm of your hand.
Okay, a lever in the hand.
When you hold a badminton grip correctly, your index finger and your thumb are positioned slightly higher up on the handle. They serve as the fulcrum.
They are the stationary pivot point.
Correct. Meanwhile, your pinky and ring finger are resting at the absolute bottom of the handle, positioned on the thickest part of the wooden grip. As your arm swings forward, remember, you are utilizing the hang technique. Your arm is relaxed, and the heavy head of the racket is trailing behind your hand due to inertia.
Because we are keeping the rope loose.
Exactly. Then, in the final 0.001 seconds, literally a millisecond before the strings make contact with the shuttlecock, your pinky and ring finger violently and explosively pull backward, pulling the bottom of the handle sharply toward the base of your palm.
So the index and thumb act as a wall, pushing slightly forward as the pivot, while the pinky and ring finger yank backward on the bottom tail of the lever.
Yes. By snapping the bottom of the lever backward with those two fingers, the top of the lever, the racket head, which is nearly 70 centimeters away, is forced to accelerate forward at an absolutely terrifying rate of speed.
That's incredible.
It is a microscopic finger movement that is geometrically amplified into massive velocity at the far end of the shaft.
But for this biomechanical trick to work, for those bottom fingers to actually be able to pull the handle backward, there has to be physical, empty space for the handle to travel into, which introduces a vital grip concept called the palm gap.
This is perhaps the most critical technical detail of the grip. When you are preparing to hit a shot, you cannot hold the racket like you would hold a heavy baseball bat or an axe. You cannot have your entire palm wrapped flush and tight against the grip.
Because if you're strangling the handle, the wood is already pressed firmly against the skin of your palm. There is zero physical runway. When you try to pull with your pinky, the handle has nowhere to go.
Exactly. You must intentionally leave a hollow gap between the handle of the racket and the fleshy center of your palm. The racket should be suspended entirely in your fingers, not resting in your palm. This empty gap provides the necessary runway for that explosive acceleration.
Okay, let's put it all together. The body rotates forward, the arm is relaxed and trailing, the palm gap is maintained. And then at the very last microsecond, the pinky and ring finger execute that violent backward pull.
When those fingers pull, the handle travels swiftly through that empty gap and violently slams into the fleshy mound of your palm, specifically the thenar eminence at the base of your thumb.
The racket literally collides with the anatomy of your own hand.
It does, and that abrupt collision is what the frameworks call the lock. The handle slams into the palm, instantly arresting its backward rotation and locking the racket solid within your grip.
Boom.
Exactly. This sudden, violent locking action is the exact mechanism that transfers 100% of the body's accumulated momentum into the shuttlecock. Without that hard lock, the racket handle would slip backward in your fingers upon impact, acting like a shock absorber and dissipating the energy rather than delivering it.
To use a mechanical analogy, if you execute the perfect jump, the flawless hip rotation, and you keep your arm perfectly relaxed, but you fail to snap those bottom two fingers and lock the racket into your palm, it is the exact equivalent of revving a massive 800 horsepower V8 engine in a sports car, but you never take your foot off the clutch.
I love that analogy.
The engine is screaming, the RPMs are maxed out, but because the clutch plate never engages, the power never transfers to the wheels, all that beautiful energy just burns up in the transmission.
That is a flawless mechanical comparison. The finger pull is the clutch plate. It is the final mechanism that physically connects the massive engine of your body to the wheels of the racket head.
What I found so illuminating in the data is that this specific finger mechanic isn't just an anomaly for the smash. It governs the entire sport.
It is the universal law of racket control. Your index finger and thumb are your high-precision instruments. They act as the pen tip for delicate, tumbling net spins, subtly directing the micro angles of the racket face.
And the bottom fingers.
But the pinky and ring finger are your trigger and your brakes. You engage them violently to snap the racket for heavy smashes, you use them to execute lightning-fast defensive drives, and you use them to abruptly halt the racket head to disguise a deceptive drop shot. True mastery of the shuttlecock is dictated entirely by the mastery of those bottom two fingers.
Okay, so we have constructed the perfect, mechanically sound kinetic chain. We've mapped the sweet spot, mastered the geometry of the net, utilized the floor for the braking effect, bridged the energy through the hips, kept the arm relaxed, and finished with the pinky finger clutch.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is. We have built a fundamentally elite smash. But to truly round out this biomechanical deep dive, we need to look at the absolute fringes of performance. I want to spend significant time exploring the elite adjustments. What are the microscopic, almost invisible physical nuances that Olympic-level athletes execute that the top 10% of club players don't even know exist?
These are the marginal gains that separate incredible athletes from true world champions. And the first major adjustment involves the anatomical role of the non-dominant hand. For a right-handed player, we are talking about the left arm.
I always assumed, and I think most people assume, that the left arm is just raised in the air to act as a targeting system, like a physical crosshair helping you track the bird.
It certainly serves a visual tracking and balance function during the initial setup phase, yes, but its active physical role during the actual forward swing is far more aggressive and violent.
What does it do?
During the explosive forward rotation of the smash, the left arm doesn't just passively drop to the side of the body. It must be aggressively, violently pulled downward and tucked tightly into the left rib cage.
Tucked tightly into the ribs. What does that do mechanically?
It exploits the physics of the conservation of angular momentum. By violently pulling the left arm inward and locking the left side of the torso, the body's rotational energy is prevented from leaking out the left side and is forced entirely into the right arm.
Oh, that's the classic figure skater physics.
That's exactly.
When a skater is spinning on the ice with their arms extended out wide, they spin at a moderate pace. But the instant they pull their arms in tight and cross them against their chest, their rotational velocity explodes and they spin incredibly fast.
Yes. By aggressively tucking that non-dominant arm into the ribs, the player is intentionally decreasing their moment of inertia. By reducing the radius of their spinning mass, they vastly increase their rotational velocity. They are forcefully channeling all of that spinning kinetic energy directly outward toward the racket head.
That is brilliant. Okay, let's move to elite detail number 2, which I noticed while watching some extreme slow-motion footage while reading these notes. We talked heavily about pronation, turning the key with the forearm. But there's a detail in the swing path that looks almost like a mistake until you understand the aerodynamics.
You are referring to micropronation, and it addresses the massive problem of fluid dynamics and wind drag.
Exactly. Because when you swing a badminton racket, the string bed and the frame create a large, flat surface area. If you swing the racket forward with the strings facing flat toward the net the entire time, you are trying to push a flat wall through the air at hundreds of kilometers per hour.
The drag coefficient would be massive. It acts exactly like a parachute deployed behind a dragster, creating tremendous air resistance that actively fights against your rotational speed.
So how do elite players neutralize that parachute?
They slice the air. If you watch high-speed footage of a professional smash, during the massive forward swing, all the way until the racket is mere inches away from the shuttlecock, the racket frame is actually facing sideways.
Sideways.
Yes, it is cutting through the air edge first, completely parting the air and reducing the aerodynamic drag to near zero.
It looks like they're swinging a sword trying to slice the shuttlecock in half.
Exactly. They maintain that edge-on slicing profile for 99% of the swing, and then only in the final 0.01 seconds, the absolute last fraction of a moment before impact, does the forearm violently pronate, turning the key to snap the string bed flat against the cork.
That timing has to be perfect.
It requires microscopic superhuman timing to square the face at the exact millisecond of impact. But the exponential increase in racket speed due to the eliminated air resistance makes the risk entirely worth it.
That is incredible. And the final elite detail revolves around something totally internal, something you can't even see on high-speed cameras: breathing mechanics and visual lock.
The biomechanics of respiration are almost universally ignored by amateur players, but they are utterly crucial for structural integrity and core stability. As an elite player prepares for the jump and draws the racket back, they execute a sharp, deep inhalation.
Why inhale at that specific moment?
Inhaling deeply fills the lungs and heavily pressurizes the thoracic cavity. This creates intra-abdominal pressure, which acts like an internal weightlifting belt.
Oh, to protect the back.
Exactly. It stabilizes the lumbar spine and structurally prepares the human body to withstand the violent rotational torque that is about to occur. It protects the spine from shearing forces. Then, precisely at the explosive moment of impact, the player must execute a sharp, violent exhale.
The martial arts data compares it to a kai-ai, the shout you hear in karate or judo.
Yes. That sharp, percussive exhale instantly and violently contracts the abdominal wall. It turns the core musculature into a rigid block of concrete, which provides a rock-solid, immovable foundation for the midair braking effect we discussed earlier. It locks the energy within the torso and channels it exclusively into the arm.
And the final piece of the puzzle, the visual lock.
This is fundamentally about engaging the body's posterior chain. When tracking the descending shuttlecock, the player must fixate their eyes exclusively on the dense cork base, deliberately ignoring the chaotic flutter of the feathers. But more importantly, from an anatomical standpoint, the player must physically point their chin up to track it.
Pointing the chin up, I would just think that's to see better. What does tilting the head actually do to the body?
By physically raising the chin and tilting the cervical spine backward, you reflexively and anatomically engage the musculature of the upper back, specifically the trapezius and the rhomboids.
It activates the muscles.
Right. This tension cascades down the erector spinae. By simply keeping the chin up, you activate the entire posterior chain, adding a massive final layer of muscular tension and structural support to the kinetic chain. If a player tucks their chin, their thoracic spine rounds forward, and those massive back muscles are instantly turned off. Head up, chin up, back engaged.
So what does this entire breakdown mean for us? Let's synthesize this incredible biomechanical journey we've just been on. We started by redefining the physical tool, identifying that the true sweet spot resides in a tiny patch of strings in the upper middle of the racket to maximize lever speed.
We fixed the geometry of the net fault, realizing that missing that upper zone by just 10 centimeters creates a downward angle that mathematically guarantees the shuttlecock will hit the 1.5-meter net. And we solved that by shifting the contact point out to the 1 o'clock position to allow full anatomical freedom.
We deconstructed the illusion of power timing, discovering that true kinetic energy comes from the violent deceleration of the braking effect, where the foot must plant milliseconds before the strike, relying on eccentric muscle contraction to absorb the shock, while the hips act as the crucial rotational bridge.
We diagnosed the invisible energy leaks, learning that muscular tension creates a kinked hose, and that we must let the arm physically lag behind the body to stretch the abdominal rubber band. We must cultivate the discipline to hang the racket in extreme relaxation.
And we unlocked the secret engine inside the hand, realizing that the final explosive velocity comes not from the wrist, but from the pinky and ring finger violently pulling the handle into the emetema palm gap, acting as the clutch that transfers 100% of our power into the projectile.
All of this, combined with the elite marginal gains like the figure skater left arm tuck, the aerodynamic sword slice of the frame, the pressurized intra-abdominal breathing, and the posterior chain engagement from a lifted chin, it all creates a breathtaking, flawless sequence of physical events happening in the blink of an eye.
It is the absolute pinnacle of human physical efficiency. And I think the ultimate takeaway from all of this data isn't just about becoming a better badminton player. It is a profound masterclass in physics and how we approach effort. True power, whether on a court or in life, it does not come from aggressive, white-knuckled, tense straining from beginning to end. It is generated through extreme, confident relaxation, followed by precisely timed, microscopic moments of tension.
It really is a lesson in knowing exactly when to be loose and exactly when to lock. Chronic tension blocks the flow of energy. Structural relaxation allows momentum to compound.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. If the scientific secret to generating massive, explosive power requires extreme relaxation, an open grip, and a loose arm until the absolute final millisecond, well, in what other areas of your life are you gripping the racket too tightly?
That's a great question.
Whether you are learning a complex new skill, trying to manage a difficult team at work, or even preparing for public speaking, are you tensing your muscles and kinking the hose from the very beginning out of anxiety? Where in your life are you losing your true power because you forgot to leave a gap, forgot to stay loose, and didn't leave any room for the snap?
We as a society constantly equate effort with tension. We falsely believe that trying harder means gripping tighter and flexing more. But the physics of the kinetic chain empirically prove that optimal, elite performance requires the quiet confidence to remain totally relaxed while the momentum builds.
So the next time you find yourself trying to force a result through sheer rigid willpower, remember the biomechanics of the badminton smash. Relax the arm, trust the kinetic sequence, and wait for the perfect exact millisecond to pull the trigger. Because remember, sometimes the X-ray of a perfect, powerful movement isn't about identifying where the maximum stress is applied. It's about seeing a beautiful, fluid sequence of energy passing perfectly from the ground through a relaxed frame and exploding exactly when and only when it needs to.